Hello, Sir Andrew, Mr Chairman, CEO, board members, fellow shareholders. Sir Andrew, my name is Brynn O'Brien. I also represent the ACCR. You may remember conversations we had when you were CEO of BHP.
I do indeed.
I'm going to come to my question, but first I'd like to offer two brief observations. One is just about the conduct of this AGM, and I just want to note for fellow shareholders that the one shareholder who has been surrounded by security staff for going a little over time was a young woman of colour. That makes me as a shareholder feel deeply uncomfortable, and I hope that it makes the board feel uncomfortable and fellow shareholders, because literally you had a performance art piece that you just threatened to cut off the microphone for. That wasn't an option that was offered to the young woman who asked the question about some very serious human rights concerns. And I just think it's very important for the board to reflect on that moment, which was highly, highly regrettable in my view. The other observation I'd like to make is about your use, the board's use today and in documentation about the term low carbon when it's applied to LNG. The observation I would make, and particularly given the litigious environment in which we operate and the legal risks that shareholders do not want to be exposed to, and I note that I personally am a shareholder and so is my organisation, the use of low carbon, the use of that term in relation to LNG, the days of the use of that term are numbered. I really think that you need to find other ways of talking about a fossil fuel that is not a low-carbon product, particularly when you take into account the life cycle of that product, the extraction, the liquefaction, the transportation, and so on. So they're my two observations. You're welcome to respond to them if you wish, but I don't expect an answer. My question is about Shell's political influence, particularly in emerging markets, and we've been fortunate to have a dialogue with your team, and we welcome Shell's commitment to make more disclosures about the lobbying that the company is doing in emerging markets. However, we've been having those conversations at a certain level within the company, and I really want to ventilate this concern, which is a real concern for us and other shareholders, around Shell's lobbying directly and indirectly for the lock-in of further fossil fuels demand in emerging markets. Let me give you one example, and that's from we've published a report on this, but the Federation of Indian Petroleum Industry, FIPI. Shell's a member of the governing body, it's a member of various committees, and that organisation is not just advocating for coal to gas switching, and I think that's another area of concern in the narrative from this company, that coal to gas switching narrative comes without context. That's a problem. We'd like to see more context on it. But the other areas of lobbying by this organisation are advocating for market creation in terms of the use of LNG in transportation, lobbying for tax changes to incentivise fossil fuels consumption. I guess the concern is, and then the question to you is, if you find in your review of industry associations and your direct and indirect lobbying that in emerging markets where you're not currently making disclosures about the lobbying that this company is doing, if you find that there is lobbying going on that is squeezing out renewables, vital, cheap renewables and battery storage coming into those systems, will you see, as you did at BHP, will you see that lobbying come to an end?
Look, I can't comment on the individual association, but maybe I can comment a bit more general on some of the issues that you've raised. I know of examples, including from my time at BHP, where the provision of LNG was absolutely critical for our country to go from coal to renewables. So I've seen it work, and I've been proud to be associated with that, where I brought LNG into a company that displaced coal power generation, but ultimately created a surge in investment in solar and wind. So it can work. And I think it's fine to think about batteries and so on to bring stability to the grid when you do these things. But for countries which, in many cases, have no domestic supply of energy and are importing things otherwise, who then want to go into renewables, having gas-fired power stations is a great way of doing that. So that's all I can comment from my own experience. From my experience at Shell, they do, as was done at BHP, and we do, I'm sure they still do it, review all of their associations in deciding which ones to remain a member and not, and choose to leave some and stay in others for a number of reasons. Sometimes because there are some things we don't agree with them on, but there are other things we do, and that's a reason for staying in something, because you want the lobbying for the things that you do, and you don't find the other lobbying particularly discordant, even though you may not fully agree with it.
I guess it's one thing to say that you think that there's a role for LNG. It is another, in the context of an opening statement today where you talked about the need for governments and customers to be active on the transition. You wish you could wind the clock forward, in your words, to a better future. And at the same time, you are lobbying, Shell is lobbying, with shareholders' money, it is lobbying to slow down that transition. And so you may not know that it is doing that. We've published a report on it. You're welcome to read it. And when we look forward to ongoing dialogue. But that is the case. You are lobbying to lock in future demand for fossil fuels and to slow down transition. So if you are genuinely committed to the transition, I call on you to eliminate that lobbying from your portfolio of industry associations.
Well,
thank you.
We'll look at it, but we do report our lobbying annually. It's published, and if organisations are not aligned, we stop membership. But let's maybe leave it there. I do want to come back to your initial statements, by the way. I mean, let me just formally say it was a very difficult situation for me to handle, the issue on Nigeria. The lady was speaking to the camera, had her backs turned to the people she was addressing, and it wasn't my choice. Obviously, we have a number of processes in place to keep the good order of the meeting, and I'm sorry if it didn't occur in the right way, because it was not exactly the way I wanted it to occur. I wanted to bring it to a question that we could deal with. And that was all I was trying to do from the chair.
I appreciate you saying that, but the apology is not owed to me.
Okay, well, okay. All right, next question.